What is happening, y'all? Cowboy here, and welcome to my review of Wuchang Fallen Feathers. Now, at this point, I have close to 60 hours played. I've gone through both the base game as well as New Game Plus, achieved the various endings, basically just working towards Platinum. Got a lot to discuss, so this review is going to be spoiler-free. We're going to be going through the second zone of the game. It's kind of, showing off locales in a little bit, fighting a little bit, showing off weapons, spells, and all that stuff as we discussed, but no story spoilers, no, major endgame components or NPCs, anything of that nature. So let's jump in. So right out the gate, I will say that all in all, I have had a lot of fun with this, and I was actually surprised because I remember when this was first revealed, they had some like sound effects that were basically like jacked straight out of Bloodborne and Sekiro, and it definitely made me a little bit apprehensive about how the quality of the final product would be, and it actually turned out to be pretty good. So that is nice to see. The game very much, I think, does manage to solidify its own identity as a Souls game, like in terms of adding new mechanics that very much kind of take a spin on the franchise and whatnot. But at its base, this is very much a Souls game. It's not Bloodborne, it's not Sekiro. It feels like a Souls game, it plays like a Souls game. You have a little bit of power fantasy going on. I mean, so in a sense, it kind of leans into Neo like that. But at the same time, the combat is very dodge focused, dodging enemies and then getting in attacks and looking for opportunities to get combos and whatnot. One of the main mechanics here is something called Skyborn Might. And so when I'm in combat, you'll notice a little head icon on the bottom left and feathers. And basically, as I attack enemies, I can build up might, or if I perfect dodge through an enemy's attack, I can build up might. And that is going to be the main resource that I use for everything. So whether I am casting spells, using weapon arts, whatever the case is, all of those are going to cast Skyborn Might. And so I can obtain this through both defensive play, that is well timed, like the dodging, or just good offensive play. So like taking this guy, for example, he should try and shoot me with an arrow in a second if I get close enough. You can see how I ended up getting a little blue feather there from dodging it. If I do it again, I now have like purple, and that color will just keep growing up. So as you continue to do attacks and as you continue to dodge, you're going to get more feathers, up to a total of 5, and those are what you cast for stuff. So I can kind of see like the spells I have on right now. So this will cost 1 to use, that'll cost 2, that'll cost 3, that'll cost 2. And then I can also see my Blade Master buff where it says left trigger in the bottom left corner. Doing that is going to give me a buff for dual blades, and those are only going to cost 1. And so I really like that, the idea of, as opposed to using mana as a constant resource, we're just gaining resource as we play, as we're playing well, both executing combos in addition to, properly dodging the enemy and making sure you're not taking hits to the face. I think that's a really good approach to it. On top of that, we also have the madness mechanic, which is actually pretty interesting. So if you look down at the bottom left once again, right where that feathering is, you'll also notice that there is a kind of silhouette of Wuchang there, and it's all red, and that means my madness is currently at max. And madness is a pretty interesting mechanic. The idea behind it is, as you kill humans in the game, like not beast enemies and whatnot, actual humans, your madness goes up, and as it goes up, you will both take more damage but also deal more damage. Now, there are various tools you can also use to increase or decrease your madness, but one of the cool aspects about it is if you die when you're at maximum madness, where you end up dropping your Red Mercury, which is this game's version of Souls, you'll also end up summoning up a demon, essentially. That's like a clone of yourself, or a revenant, if you will, that you have to fight off to reobtain your madness. And on top of that, killing them is going to net you some pretty nice rewards that can then be used in the upgrade tree. And so it's very much like a risk-reward system where you could decide to, you could play things safe and keep your madness low and never have to interact with that. Or you could say, screw it, keep madness up at max. I want more damage, and I'll deal with the demon when it shows up, which is what I did most of my playthrough. But so some really interesting core concepts going on there in terms of resource generation as well as the madness system. Another thing that I really like from a gameplay perspective is all of the weapons very much have their own identity. And to explain, on top of having regular combos, each weapon kind of has something that's unique to it. So dual blades, for example, a couple of the attacks of dual blades have something that's known as clash. And the idea is if I'm doing a clash move and it lands at the same time an enemy would land an attack, I can basically just mitigate out that attack in full. I completely go through them. So if I can get one here, it's going to be pretty hard to actually show that off here because this is like, I'm at the very end of New Game Plus and I came back to an earlier zone to do a review. If I can, let's see if I can just kind of take an attack while I'm doing it. I don't think there's going to be anything strong enough around here for me to actually clash with. But it's pretty neat, you know, because the clash will go off and I'll shrug off the attack. Meanwhile, something like the one-handed sword is more tied to magic and feathering. So think of it as like the default caster weapon, if you will. And with that, I'm able to just passively gain the Skyborn Might over time. So as I do actions, so there was a clash. You can see how the first attack he did, I just completely shrugged it off. The second attack, I took a little bit of damage. So with the one-handed sword, as I do weapon arts and whatnot, if you look down in like the bottom left, you can see a little counter that's building up. Right now it's at 4 and ticking down, and now it's down to 2. And as that counter builds up, that's going to fuel more Skyborn Might into my characters so that I can continue to do weapon arts and cast and whatever the case is. So, you know, lots of differences between weapons. I mean, Spear has some really good evasive play. Longsword probably has some of the most flexibility in terms of status application and whatnot. If you look at Axe has just crazy knockdown potential. So on top of just like the regular moveset you would expect with each weapon kind of has its own identity and something that it performs very, very well at. Now, not only that, but perhaps one of the nicest things about it is the respec system in this game is absolutely beautiful. And this is something I love. I think this is the best it's been done in a Souls game. So as we are going up our tree, you know, we're picking up our stat points, for example, agility, and then we get something that's going to be for our weapons. So with this, I can consume Skyborn Might to fast charge attacks. This makes it so the 4th attack is going to generate Skyborn Might. And then I'm continuing through grabbing passives, and then I have skills. The various skills can grab upgrades as well. And then my weapon upgrades are also in this tree. But let's say I wanted to play with Axe, right? I can just reset, and then go to the Axe tree. And just like that, every axe I have would have been upgraded to level 6. So really, really big fan of the talent tree here because we have our weapon upgrades tied directly into the tree. And this is unlocked from the start, by the way. So you can refund stuff at any time. Like in my actual playthrough, I started off... Am I still at 10? Yeah, I am. Started off playing as a magic type build, and then I respec'd and I played longsword for a little bit, and then I played dual blade for a little bit, and then I played axe for a little bit, and then as I was going through New Game Plus, I tried out feathering and spear, and you know, I just freely respec. So that's something that I had a lot of fun with, and honestly, I think it's one of my new favorite approaches to a system like that in a Souls-like, because you know, having that much freedom in your play approach, just being able to respec your character whenever you want, and not just respec, but also have the stat points that you've put into weapons come along with you. That's huge, because we've talked about this before in Souls games where it's like, you know, it's nice that I can respec from strength to dex, but that doesn't help me get all of my dexterity weapons upgraded. Now I suddenly got to go back and farm materials. Nope. Your weapons, just whatever you put them in, all the weapons are gonna level up. This is true for all of the weapons. So like right now, if I go through it, you know, every one-handed sword is going to be level 10 because I have 10 upgrades in the one-handed sword tree, and the same is true for dual blades. And I think that is a both extremely intuitive and also just user-friendly approach here. It's something that I really, really appreciate in terms of like gameplay design. Talking a little bit and moving on to world design. I actually like the world a lot in this game. It starts off, we have a bunch of different locales to go through, and we have areas that are varying from like humanoid encampments like the one we're in now to areas that are more flush with monsters or, you know, various creatures that you're going to have to fight. We have what you would expect in terms of like the castle type structures or more you know, just kind of like assaulting the castle, if you will. So a decent amount in locale variety. I don't want to talk about any of the late locales, but things do get pretty wild as you progress into the late game as well. And the world design itself, I think the area that it is the best is in terms of the world interconnectivity, because there are some Dark Souls 1 levels of secrets and interconnectivity going on in the world. And it really did take like 2 full playthroughs before I was able to start really getting my mental map down of how everything connects together. And I guess a really, look at how the sword's just tracing the stone, so cool. A good example is this zone I'm in right now. or excuse me, not this zone, but there's a zone, the next zone that I could go to. As I'm going through it, there's like 2 different ways I could go. One of them kind of progresses the zone. One of them goes into a full portion of a side zone called the Avian Marsh. But as you're progressing the main portion of Zone 3, you're actually able to take a side path and like bypass all of Avian Marsh and just pop in and kill the boss with skipping the majority of the zone. And then there's, you know, shortcuts from there that'll take you back over to the main base. So there's just like, you know, there's at the start of the game, there's like 3 different ways to get back to the main hub that you discover. As we're playing, you're going to discover zones that are going to connect to different zones and shortcuts and ladders all over the place. So all that type of stuff that you would probably expect in a Souls-like is done very, very well here. And the design of the world and how it's all laid out, they definitely took a lot of time kind of getting that down and trying to really recreate that feeling of discovery that I think is something that makes Dark Souls so special. On top of that, let's talk briefly about quest design, because that kind of fits into this category, and the quest design is very Dark Souls. So, you know, when you think Dark Souls and you think of the obscure-ass quests, those are here. Whether you love them or hate them, you know, they are here. You're going to have NPCs that, you know, I hope you talk to them all 6 times they showed up in your playthrough, or you're not going to get the ending you want, that type of shit. But, you know, I'm honestly, I've come to love that stuff as time has gone on, because it's, to me, it's like solving a puzzle as you play the game. So that's just something that I end up really enjoying. But yeah, we have the obscure ass quest lines. We have obscure treasures that are hidden all over the place, as opposed to like false walls. We do have these interesting puzzle doors where like one answer will just get you a little treasure, the other will warp you somewhere that you otherwise can't get to. So lots of different stuff going on, and those also tie into New Game Plus, because if you want to experience all the choices, you have to go through to New Game Plus. But so overall, the world design and the quest design, they really do propel the player to explore and try to experience as much of the world as possible. And even going through a full New Game Plus playthrough, there are still quest lines that I'm trying to figure out specifics for. So there's definitely a lot to dig into here. Talking a little bit about the story is very much told through the NPCs. Like, there is an overarching theme that you're going to get as you play the game, but I think the better part of the story is, in a sense, kind of similar to Dark Souls. It's told through your NPCs, and it's told through the relationships and through items you find, and, you know, you're learning about them, and depending on what items you give to what NPCs are going to progress the story in a certain way. But overall, I like the story. I mean, it's not going to win any awards. You know, it's not Death Stranding level of story. But the story here, it's not bad by any means. And I do like the flexibility and approach in terms of like how things can wrap up. And just to give like a very brief example. So there's some like NPCs that you can meet in Act 3 that are actually kind of endearing. And my first playthrough, there was some extra dialogue that was applicable to them that I didn't end up getting involved in. And later in that act, after I was like wrapping things up, I found them all just slaughtered in a camp. And then on my New Game Plus playthrough, I like, you know, took extra time so you can see some cheeky fucking traps like that. You go to get that, and this asshole shoots a cannon at you. But in my New Game Plus playthrough, I was progressing through, and I found a way to progress their quest line further. And then they ended up going into the 3rd zone with me, and, you know, meeting me and all the other NPCs at the refugee camp. And then I like helped bring them medicine, and I was progressing towards getting them to escape. But I got like the final person to escape, but I couldn't find the other 2, and she didn't want to leave with the other 2. So like branching narratives, branching quest lines with NPCs, lots of really good stuff there. And it's the type of stuff that, you know, you're basically gonna want a guide to figure it all out. Which, before you even ask, yes, I already do have plans for a walkthrough here. Talking a little bit about the graphics, I think from a visual perspective, the game actually looks really close to Nioh for me for some reason. I don't know if it's more just the aesthetic. I actually think the graphical quality here is better than Nioh, but the overall aesthetic and look reminds me of Nioh a lot. Now, obviously, I love Nioh, so that's not a bad thing by any means. There's a lot going on in these environments. You know, you're not going to get the like giant architecture that you would expect in like a Souls game, but, you know, when you think about kind of the way camps are laid out with like interconnecting areas and whatnot, it is very Nioh-esque in nature, if that makes sense. I know Nioh is more hub-based as opposed to open world, how this is, but I don't know. I mean, just, you know, just staying right here for a second before going down. and looking at the camp, I mean, there's a ton of detail going on in the world. You know, you can smokestacks off in the distance. The mountains don't look uniform. There's a bunch of like love that's clearly been put into the environment. I think it's the busyness though. I think that's what it is. Because when I think Dark Souls, I feel like the environments are beautiful, but they're kind of simple, but not in a bad way, if that makes sense. And here there's stuff everywhere. And that does lend itself to the world in certain cases really well, but it does have like a busy feeling at times. But I don't think the graphics are bad by any means. I just think there's a lot going on for you to pay attention to. And at times it can get kind of overwhelming. And I guess a good example of it, if I can find it, I always lose track of where the damn thing is. Let me see. So right around here somewhere. Not you. Close to this guy, but basically there is like right here. So this is a shortcut that I can take to get into this camp, but just like with how much shit is going on, like that's hard to spot, you know. That's, unless you're like combing through walls, you know, you might not even see this well here. So unless you discovered it from the other direction, you might not even know this exists, just because there's so much just visual stuff on the screen. You know, we got the carts and the pots and the cooking thing and the bowl, and you know, I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it is very busy. And you know, if you're trying to find all the secrets, you're really gonna have to take your time going through zones and looking, because you know, stuff like that, like even now, just where the hell did it go? Yeah, like right there. I mean, that blends in so well. At a glance, you would never think there's a shortcut right there, you know. I hate the bouncing Betty so much, dude. These things are so toxic. Talking about audio design though, audio is very solid here. The sound effects, I really like the sound effects of the weapons in terms of like the slicing, the unsheathing of the sword, the sound of the spells as you're popping those off and whatnot. Enemies have like death cries, which is something that's kind of cool. We don't usually see that a lot in games. Let's see if I can't get some less. Give you an idea of spell sound effects and whatnot. But overall, sound design has been good. Voice acting was actually really solid, and that surprised me because I played the game on English, and every now and again, you know, you have a game that well, we're starting to see more Chinese games come into the AAA market, but I've seen some that come out and they have English dubbing available, and the English dubbing ends up being pretty poor. But all in all, the English voice acting was fine here. I didn't have any issues whatsoever with it. I think the voices overall fit the characters pretty well. I haven't played the game in the other languages available. I'll probably check out and play the game in Chinese as I'm doing the walkthrough prep, just to get a feel for how the voices sounded there. But you interrupted my shit, bro. Splatted. But sound design has been good. In terms of boss music, I mean, overall, I think I liked the boss music. There weren't any tracks that, like, really stood out and blew me away, though. Like, when I think of boss music, I think that is one thing that FromSoft still tends to just kind of dominate in the Souls-like category that I haven't seen any of its competitors really able to match. I don't know if it's just, like, the Latin and the chanting or what the case is, but when it comes to boss music, FromSoft still has that on lockdown, whereas a lot of other games, I feel like it starts to fade into the background a little bit. And I don't know if maybe it's just the audio mixing, you know, maybe it's because boss music is just so booming loud in Souls games, which absolutely is a thing. But there weren't any boss tracks that like immediately stood out to me. There was one track in general where like, it's hard to describe this without spoiling it, but like basically you enter a new zone and like, it just kind of opens up and music starts playing and you're like, yo, this is pretty epic right now. So there are good tracks. It's just, you know, nothing that really blows me away or feels incredibly in line with the moment that it's playing, except for that one instance that I recall from the end of the game. Talking a little bit about the length and price. For your average playthrough, you're going to be looking anywhere between probably 25 and 40 hours. Now that's obviously a pretty broad scope of time, and the main reason for that being that this game takes a Sekiro approach, where There are multiple endings, and depending on what ending you go for, you could miss the entire 5th act of the game, like I did in my first playthrough. So there is a lot of content to get out of this. Like I said, going through New Game Plus right now, I'm coming up on 60 hours. My first playthrough ended up clocking in around 25, and as I mentioned, that was with accidentally missing the final zone. So for the New Game Plus playthrough, I rushed through the early zones because I was super thorough with them, and then a bunch of stuff that I lost the ability to do on my first playthrough, I went back and I spent a lot of time just really kind of just digging into that stuff. So all in all, I'd say on average, your average player is probably going to be looking at, I'd say, about 30 to 35 hours for a playthrough, and then your completionists are going to be looking at a lot more. And the game's priced in at 50 for the base version of the game, or 60 for the deluxe edition, which in the current gaming climate where people think $80 is a good price for a game, that's actually really nice to see, you know. I'm not a giant fan of price of games all going up. I mean, it seems like it's going to happen regardless, but you know, it always, I mean, no one likes it when prices go up, you know. Just, it is what it is. So having a game that's this beefy coming in at that $50 price point, it kind of you know, keeps hope alive, if you will. So bugs and performance. Now, in terms of bugs, I didn't really have any gameplay type bugs. I will say there was something weird going on with DLSS, so I ended up playing with FRS on instead. And it is worth noting that I don't have the day 1 patch currently. So all things considered, I mean, no day 1 patch. It's, you know, the game was still incredibly smooth in terms of how it ran and animations. I didn't have any like oddities where, you know, my character would, I don't know, fall off the map, or items would fall off the map. In fact, if I like killed enemies by knocking off the map, usually the loot would just kind of pop into my inventory, which was nice to see. But so no weird gameplay bugs that really came up. The DLSS thing did kind of throw me off a little bit. Like the start of the game, I was, you know, tweaking the various graphic settings, and I don't know how to describe it, but there was something that felt off, almost like, you know, the uncanny valley of video games. And I just tweaked stuff a bunch, and then finally like killed DLSS, put on FRS, put on VSync, and everything started looking a lot better. So, you know, I don't know how well it's going to work on console, and actually it's probably worth discussing. This is obviously playing on PC. I'm playing on a 4090, so if I was having performance issues, that would be a bigger problem. I don't have any experience with the console version, but I have heard from some people playing on console that performance is less than stellar. So I would look to someone that's doing a console review in particular if you're looking to get the game on console. On PC so far, though, it runs good. And, you know, if you get it and it doesn't run good, well, you know, Steam gives you very gratuitous refund windows anyway. Now, before we move on to the rating, there are a couple of nitpicks that I want to address. And I don't think these are things that really like fall into a particular gameplay category, but I do think they take away from the overall experience and should be noted. So one of the first things is when you die, trying to find your essence is not good, you know? So, and this is the thing, you know, we die in Souls games, we drop our stuff. Everyone is familiar with how that works. But in this game, when you drop your Mercury, it just kind of turns into this like little dark puddle on the ground. And let me see if I can just, well, it'll probably summon a Madness Demon if I die right here. But it's quite hard to see. And, you know, it does the effect of like it's going to stay in the boss room. So imagine going into a boss room and then you're trying to find what looks to be like a dark puddle of water with a little droplet. And the boss room is a boss room that happens to be filled with dark water. It's super obnoxious. So I got to the point where like when I was going to a boss, I would just use consumable items to basically get close enough to grab a level. And then that way I wouldn't have to worry about picking anything up. Because when you drop your stuff, especially if it's in a boss fight, it's a pain in the ass to find. And I really think they could, like, you know, make it, because it's called Red Mercury. So, you know, make it red, make it a bit more glowy. There's no reason for it to be, you know, blending into the dirt as I'm trying to find it. That just feels like a weird oversight. Another thing that's really odd is, you know, and this is especially odd because we have stuff like the free respecking, which is huge quality of life. And then for some reason, we only have 4 quick slots. I don't know why they decided to limit it to 4 quick slots, but it was pretty annoying because I'd keep my tempering on, which was like my weapon buff. I'd keep my heal. I'd usually keep some type of status removal, whether I was dealing with corruption or poison or whatever the case is. And then the last item usually went towards like some utility that I needed in that zone. And, you know, it just seems weirdly arbitrary. I would have much rather had like 6 items, 8 items. Like, I don't know. 4 quick slot just seems like, why? Why is it so limited? I don't know. Doesn't make any sense to me. Now, while those are more nitpicks, one thing that I will call out that is a bigger concern overall is the general balance of the game. And, you know, in terms of a challenge, I think that, for me at least, I think this is probably on the easier side of various Souls-likes I played. I think especially because of the ability to free respec, which I do like, it is easier to test stuff out and find builds that are potentially game-breaking, which I obviously ended up doing. But to that extent, some of the things that I found that I thought were kind of broken actually were part of just what helped carry me through New Game Plus, especially towards the end of New Game Plus, where enemies started getting stronger and stronger, and other stuff that I would have considered kind of like the normal playstyle simply couldn't keep up. And I guess a good way to describe this is, at the start of my playthrough, I began playing with magic initially. Magic felt really strong. I was nuking stuff left and right. And I was like, man, this is crazy good, you know? This is, wait, send out invitation to find a talent preparation. Shen the Butler. You know, magic felt really strong, and after a while I was like, you know, I think I'm a little too OP. I'm going to tone it down. I'm going to swap over and play longsword, and swapped over to longsword. Longsword was fine. You know, swapped over to dual blades. Dual blades were fine. Swapped over to axe. Axe was fine. Progressed into New Game Plus, and I'm doing more experimenting. Late game New Game Plus, magic simply does not keep up. And to put things in perspective, even with my magic stat at the hard cap that's available, you know, I could probably just show it off. I think this guy has a rest spot. You know, here, let's put on, let's see, let's go to Lotus Soul Flame. So this is a 4-cost spell. It's a pretty strong spell. Pretty long cast time. Send that on out. 1379, right? And you're like, what are you talking about? You almost one-shot that guy. But I can do that same amount of damage in like 3 swings with my dual blades while having active damage mitigation the entire time. And you know, that cost me 4 Skyborn Might to do. By comparison, I did the same damage, just that much faster. So magic and feathering do seem to fall off extremely hard once you get into New Game Plus, which is disappointing to say the least, you know? Yeah, so that was like 900 and then 500. Like, you know, it's just the damage doesn't tend to keep up with magic. And it goes a little bit beyond that, you know. Dual blades, obviously we have the clash mechanic. If I'm putting on my defensive buff and then my attack speed buff, I can effectively just clash through enemies almost indefinitely, which definitely feels very broken. Axe has an absolutely staggering amount of poise, to the point where like I can just chug potions in the face of enemies and they can't interrupt me. That definitely feels really busted. Longsword, I think, felt the most balanced, and Spear, on the other hand, I actually feels kind of lackluster, because the Spear has a defensive-oriented playstyle where you're really rewarded for timing these evasive maneuvers, and then you get a follow-up counterattack, but a lot of the bosses are very high movement, and so even if you evade the boss, that follow-up counterattack whiffs like 75% of the time, and that's like your primary method of gaining might with the Spear, is doing the dodges into the counterattacks. And so it just kind of, like, late game New Game Plus, I was in this cycle where I would either, you know, if I was against a humanoid, I would go with axes just because of the sheer knockdown potential of them. If I was against something bigger, I would just go with dual blades like I am right now and just cut through the target. And then Outside of that, that was really it, because, you know, magic wasn't really keeping up. Nothing against longsword, but it just wasn't as good as these two. And spear of the enemy kept dodging all my shit. And so it's definitely this, like, just, I don't know. It didn't feel great. I guess that's a good way to describe it. Like, this is one of the demons that can summon up from my corpse. So right now, this is like one of the most broken things I have discovered. So what we're doing is we're putting up the shield. The shield mitigates all damage. On top of that, I have leech on my weapons, so I am just able to R1 through and attack the target. You know, if I don't clash through the attack, the bubble is there as an extra layer of protection, and then I have the swords healing me, and I have insane might gain coming in because of the enhanced attack speed. And so, you know, it's very, very easy for certain setups to just outright break the game. You know, I just came in here and just literally R1'd to victory. And, you know, I'm not against games having broken setups. I frequently seek these out. I try to find ways that I can break games and see, like, you know, how can I make this as OP as possible? I'm okay with that. My problem is more that it doesn't feel good that you can do shit like that with dual blades and you can do shit like that with axe, and then you're maxing out your might to cast a 5 Skyborn might cost spell, and that shit hits for like 1500 damage. And so there's a very, very big discrepancy at the moment between how potent certain builds are compared to others. Now, the saving grace here, like I said, is that there is full respec. So if you're playing as Magic and you're like, man, Magic started off strong and now it's getting disappointing. Well, guess what, my friend? You can easily swap over and join us with Dual Blade Superiority or the Unga Bunga Gang. But, you know, that feels more like an excuse than a problem to the solution. So all that being said, final score for this one, as it stands now, I would probably put this at a 4 out of 5. If they take the time to balance stuff up here and, you know, kind of bring everything in line, I think it could propel this to like a 9 out of 10, maybe. I don't know if it would actually hit 10 out of 10 status, only because there was nothing that really blew me away here. Yeah, so right now, probably an 8 out of 10. If they go ahead and they get all that stuff patched up and balanced, probably more in the 9 out of 10 category, because it is a very fun Souls-like. I mean, I wouldn't put 60 hours into something that I dislike. And, you know, coming up with these broken-ass builds has been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed testing out stuff, but just the more I've played, the more I've found that there are just very big balance discrepancies between certain play styles. And as someone that loves Magic in these games, it kind of feels bad to see Magic just, you know, start off strong and then just can't keep up whatsoever, while Blades are just like, what up? I'm going to smash everything. So either way, that's going to wrap things up for me. Like I said, obviously a very good game. And I mean, it's Gunnar Souls, you know, who doesn't love Gunnar Souls? You want to see something funny? There's like the best, where's it at? Where are they at? The Overlord? Yeah, these boots. So I had to run a set that had high protection values against, I don't know if it was like Burn or Despair, but like the high defense set was basically like this. It's basically just like I needed like max Despair resist or something, and I'm like, huh, out of all the armors I have, this is the best Despair resist. Okay. Y'all know what you were doing with this. You knew exactly what you were doing when you put this together. So yeah, Gunnar Souls is absolutely a thing, but it's actually pretty solid. So either way, that is going to wrap things up for me for the review. I'll have the Let's Play series starting off in a day, and then from there, I'll be diving into the walkthrough prep streams. So thanks for coming by, and I'll catch you next time.